Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's HCMx Radio, the only podcast in the HCM arena that weaves current market research, HR technology, and industry leaders into each episode. Our HCMx Radio host is our Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, I'm Rachel Cook and the host of Brandon Hall Group's radio podcast, as well as our COO. I'm excited to be here today with our guest. We have Ashlyn MacNamara, who is the Learning and Development Manager from LearnUpon. Hi, Ashlyn. How are you?
Hey, Rachel. Hey, Michael. Thank you so much for having me. I'm good. Thank you.
Fantastic. And also joining me from Brandon Hall Group, our Chief Strategy Officer and Principal, Michael Rochelle. Hey, Michael.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see everyone today.
And welcome to our discussion for those of you that are listening in or joining us. And I want to offer a little bit of background about Ashlyn for those of you that may not know her. She is the Learning and Development Manager at LearnUpon. She has designed and led the implementation of an innovative learning solutions for hundreds of learners through her experience in fast growth technology companies. She is passionate about creating learner-centered programs that help drive company objectives. And so we have a very rich conversation that we're going to get started here about learning performance, and just a little bit background about LearnUpon. They are an LMS. They have an LMS powerful platform with a practical approach to learning by combining industry-leading capabilities, unmatched ease of use, and unrivaled customer support. Organizations can manage, track, and achieve their diverse learning goals all through a single powerful solution. And they have over 1,200 customers worldwide, and they are one of the fastest growing LMSs. They are also a gold preferred provider of Brandon Hall Group. They've won 7 Brandon Hall Group awards in 2021. Congratulations, that's fantastic. And today we are, as I mentioned earlier, this is a continued discussion from a recent webinar that Ashlyn presented on with our learning analyst in December, and the topic was on, is your learning driving performance? They had a lot of good questions, and so we wanted to continue that discussion. We also have several ebooks that we're collaborating with LearnUpon on a similar topic, is learning driving performance, and so stay tuned for that shortly in the next coming months. And so, Ashlyn, to get us started, before we jump in, do you have is there anything more that you'd like to add? You've been in the learning space for about a decade or more, and with that you have a lot of great experience. Is there anything that you'd like to also shed on your experience?
Yeah, I think the only other thing to add in here, Rachel, that might be interesting for anyone listening in is for LearnUpon, we've only recently set up our L&D team, so around 12 months ago when I joined. So this is a really pertinent topic for us. It's top of mind. We're building a lot of programs from the bottom up, and our guiding question is, how are these programs firstly helping our learners, but also helping performance? So it's just a really interesting topic to get into today.
Great. And so that must, that's interesting, and I'm sure you have a lot of lessons learned and a lot of tips that you can offer. And so my first question is, why developing a learning strategy with improved performance is key, not just learning, but how do you really drive the performance?
Yeah, I think if we're developing programs where, learning or knowledge gain is the ultimate outcome or thing that we're measuring, we're really not doing a service to the value that L&D can offer to companies. And I think, we're usually in a really privileged position within companies that we work with every team, and we have a pretty good relationship with our managers and our senior stakeholders. And I think, we can really be the connective tissue between all of those and try and design programs that, yes, there is knowledge gain, but that are ultimately trying to bring performance into the question. And I do think even with small L&D teams, I know a lot of L&D teams are usually short on resources. I think even in a small team, we still have the knowledge and resources to use something like the learning performance convergence model and start to ask questions around, okay, if our teams have this knowledge, then what do we want them to go and do with it? And how would we see that show up in our business results?
Absolutely. And you bring up the convergence model, which is something that we've spent a lot of time on as well. Michael, what do you distill from that model?
Well, I think, what we push, which is well aligned with what LearnUpon is discussing, is learning in and of itself can't be the outcome anymore. It just can't be enough to track completions or grades or someone's, stamped that they learned it. We really need to have it connect to a change in behavior, change in performance, ultimately meeting business outcome, so that we can really generate the true return on investment in learning, and also did learning do what it was supposed to do. So absolutely that, learning needs to be strongly connected to performance at an individual, team, and organizational level.
Absolutely. And Ashlyn, how important, or what is the role of communication in sharing the importance of programs and aligning L&D's goals with the organization?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to trying to impact performance and design programs that do that, we play a really important role in, first of all, looking at, okay, even if there is all these variables on performance, which sometimes is what can stop us from trying to measure it, because, there's a lot of other things that are impacting the behaviors of teams, is if we do consider those variables, especially at the start, when we're doing program design, we can play a really important role in connecting the right teams together and thinking about, okay, if we deliver this, learning program, there is also these other variables and teams that impact it. Let's have that discussion now. Let's align on what all of us can be doing to get to that end goal. And I thought a really interesting example maybe to share. So at the moment in LearnUpon, we're looking at implementing design thinking for our product team. So I think in a traditional model, you would go out, find your vendors, check that they have the right type of training for your company, get your contract signed, the admin side of L&D, get it in place, deliver the training, measure that everyone completed it and what they thought of it. But actually considering the performance model and taking that into account, we're now having a very different conversation at the investment stage to figure out if, yes, we want everyone to know what design thinking is, but then what do we want them to go and do with that? How will we see that show up in team meetings, in meetings with engineering? What's that behavior? And, the goal isn't to implement design thinking methodology. The goal is really to design a better product for our customers. So I think once you start, thinking that way, it really opens up a whole different conversation around the business. And that's where the role of communication comes in. And, kind of going back to that connective tissue idea, that you can start to really be more influential than the more traditional model.
Absolutely. And communication is so key. It supports that change management and that mindset. And, all too often, that is one of the things sometimes, is lacking, the ability to really get the message out or get it out properly, or take a step back and really kind of assess who's your audience and how you're addressing them. And maybe the way that you're addressing the community is different than you're addressing the stakeholders, or, what do the stakeholders really want to know? And how do you make sure that you are properly delivering that message? So, that's really, really important. You can have a great program, but if they're not aware, if your audience or your key members are not aware of the value and the importance, then you're not necessarily going to get the return that that you could potentially get. So that's a really good area to focus on. And also, we mentioned the convergence model and tying outcomes to business outcomes or behavior outcomes. I think it would be good if you could spend a little bit of time here kind of sharing your thoughts on what does that mean.
Yeah, and I think it can be quite a challenge, and it definitely requires a little bit more upfront work for an L&D team and a little bit more analysis and in really mapping it out. And we were actually just doing it as a team this morning is, okay, if this is our business goal, what do we need our learners to behave in a certain way to achieve that, and then what are the learning objectives? Because I think it's really easy to jump straight into the learning objectives and say, by the end of this training program, this is what you'll know. But really thinking about, okay, by the end of this training program, this is what you'll be doing or behaving. So trying to chart that out as best you can. And I think it's definitely not science, it's probably a little bit more art, and it really depends on the type of program and learner. But we just try and really sit down and spend time at the beginning of a program to map that out and to verify that with the rest of the business. And I think kind of going back to that communication point, really important to align, we're not going to be able to solve or completely influence the business outcome. There's lots of other factors. So sometimes it's just explaining, this is the learning objective, and then this is what we're not covering. Because I think, we can't cover everything in every single program.
Sure, and especially in the world that we are in right now, there's a lot of uncertainty in the way that you are even delivering your programs, or if their workforce is still remote or partially remote or kind of hybrid, going back and forth. One minute we are in the office, one minute we're not. So there's just, and it's hitting everybody wherever you are. Maybe it's slightly different, but you can't escape it right now. So we're all impacted in one way or another, or we're having to understand also our clients and our ecosystem around us. So it's definitely, I don't want to say challenging, because then it's all doom and but I think it gives us a lot of opportunities, but it also it causes us to pause a lot and to have to really kind of assess to make sure this is what we should be doing, right?
I agree with you, both of you, and I think to add another dimension is learning takes up a lot of time and energy, both for the learning organization, for the learner. Getting the learner to understand what's in it for them, why it's important, taking the time to get them aligned and engaged is super important. Mm-hmm. And particularly in a hybrid environment where it's super complicated to communicate with people, getting them on the same page of what the learning is going to do for them, what opportunities it might open, advancements, recognition, rewards, not just for what the company needs, is super important this day and age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
It's such a great point as well, Michael. I suppose when we think about the model, it's very much tied to the business outcomes. But if we jump into the learner view, their business outcomes are, most likely their career path, where are they going in the company, what opportunities will this provide? And I think once you can give the why, and we try as best we can when we're designing programs, or, if we're preparing comms or slides to say, why you should care about this and where it will help lead you to. And I think that's really, really important.
And so, in explaining the why and the impact, how do you use metrics, and how do you ensure that you are implementing the right metrics, and what from your expertise or your experience, what do you find that's really important here or critical?
Yeah, I think from my experience is to try and keep it as simple as possible. So, you don't want to end up with 10 to 12 metrics per program that are really hard to measure, and it kind of becomes unattainable in the end. You want, very high level health metrics is the way that I like to think about them, that indicate, if this program is working. And I think, even going back to the communication point, is programs and learning can take a long time. Behavior change can take, it could be a year, it could be 2 years. It really depends on the type of program. So having your initial metrics that will indicate that the program is working effectively is really important. And then your long-term metrics that should really prove that the program has been successful or has had a return on investment. So I think trying to think about the two different types of metrics that you'll need, and then communicating that back to the business and when they can expect to see those metrics changing or improving.
And I think it gets back to the learning and performance convergence model. I mean, the underpinning of that model is to develop outcome-based learning. So the idea is to start with the end state, which is, what do you want someone to be able to do? Demonstrate, observe, and then working backwards into the learning. And when you start with the end state and work backwards into the learning, it's much easier to develop and align the KPIs or the milestones that you're looking for, because it's transparent. So if you know what riding a bike looks like, and you know what you need to see to make sure that someone's riding a bike correctly, it's a lot easier to work backwards into what do they need to know, and how do you know they're learning it, because everyone has the same end state in mind.
Yeah, and it makes so much sense, exactly what you said there, with the end in mind, and you almost want to be jumping to the top of your Kirkpatrick model or whatever model that you're using and figure out what are the results, what does success look like. And yeah, we really try and ask ourselves, it's not necessarily what the learner needs to know, but really what they need to go and do, and what will we see if they're doing that successfully.
And that's why the measurement piece is really important to incorporate when you're along the entire way of your program and not afterwards. And too often, and I think it's starting to change. I think the learning organization is starting to understand that you cannot think of learning as an afterthought, or I'm sorry, not learning, the metrics or the measurement piece as something that you do after, and then you really have to really put it in place along each of the phases. So that way you're, as you mentioned, Ashlyn, you're not measuring too much, you're really kind of figuring out what is it that you can measure and how do you capture it and how do you report on it and then communicate it afterwards. So all those components, and keeping it simple, right? What do your leaders want to know? What do your learners want to know? You don't need to know everything, but you need to make sure that it's making some type of progress for the individual as well as the organization. And what is that? So all very good points. And before we wrap up today, Ashlyn and Michael, what are some considerations that you want to leave our listeners today with?
Yeah, I think for anyone who's sitting down now at the start of the year and planning out their L&D programs or thinking about how they can impact performance, is just to give yourself enough time to take into account the performance model, to really think through all the variables, align on what those end metrics are. And I think, our most successful program so far in LearnUpon, yes, they've taken a little bit longer to design and implement, but it's been worth it because the implementation has gone quite smoothly and everyone is aligned on what kind of performance they're delivering.
And I would just quickly add that I don't think you can do it right unless you have a good partner. And I think that's the message. It's not because learning organizations don't understand what's important, but just for all the reasons that we can think of. They need great partnership, and an organization like yours can really be that partner, because even if you work on it for today, you have to have an eye on tomorrow as well, and you need someone that can be there every step of the way as you evolve and transform this. So I would definitely say, a good solid partner is exceptionally important.
Because you're going to bring some of that perspective that, while you're doing it, it's sometimes hard to gain the bigger picture of everything, the innovative part of it, the new technologies coming out, or how to simplify things better, leverage what you have better. So there's a lot to it, and you know, again, congratulations on winning all of the awards last year. We were hoping to have a conference this year, but unfortunately, we're putting a pause until to be determined for next year, hopefully. And I keep saying hopefully, so we're back here in 2022. But again, it's not any different than what everybody else is experiencing, and until, you know, we can come together in person. You're in Ireland today, Michael's in Boca today, I'm in Delray Beach, Florida, so you know, it still kind of feels like we're in the same room together, right?
Yeah.
And then all of you that are joining us, either watching or listening or reading, you know, however you like to receive our information, you know, we're able to come to all of you in this format. So we're very fortunate, and we hope that all of you have enjoyed our discussion. I did, and thank you, Ashlyn, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, it's a wrap. Take care.
Thanks, guys.